She claimed she was disciplining her child for God, then scalded him with boiling water and let him die in pain. Another burned her mother-in-law alive for money. These are the women rotting in prison, and they want you to believe they're victims. In today's True Crime Countdown, we're exposing the darkest female minds behind bars, women who betrayed those closest to them. And these aren't cold cases. These women are alive, in prison. Now some are eligible for parole. Others will never walk free again. We're starting from the least evil and ending with the most haunting case of them all. Brace yourself. This is the countdown of the most evil female killers currently locked away in prison. Case 16, Stephanie Langley. It was a regular Monday evening at the Hare and Hounds pub in Maidstone, Kent. September 11th, 2023. Locals gathered after work, chatting over drinks. The landlord, 52-year-old Matthew Bryant, was behind the bar as usual, serving regulars and cracking small jokes. But outside, in the shadows of the street lamps, someone was waiting. Her name was Stephanie Langley, 55 years old. A woman with no prior violent record, no known grudges, no diagnosed mental illness. But what she did next would leave a quiet community speechless, and one family shattered forever. Stephanie had once been part of Matthew's life. Years ago, she had married his brother, but that relationship had ended, and with it, any meaningful connection to the Bryant family. For more than 2 decades, the two had gone their separate ways. That changed in March 2023. Stephanie walked back into Matthew's pub and into his life. She became a regular face at the bar, striking up casual conversations, sharing drinks, and, at least on the surface, appearing harmless. But something was building beneath the surface. Witnesses would later report that Stephanie's behavior became increasingly erratic. She spoke of Matthew with an odd familiarity, sometimes warmly, sometimes bitterly. And then, on that September night, she returned to the Hare and Hounds with a different kind of energy. According to eyewitnesses, she stood at the bar, smiling. She looked directly at one customer and said, "Get a drink while he's still alive." The words hung in the air. People laughed awkwardly. No one knew what to make of it. Matthew, now slightly unsettled, excused himself from behind the bar. He walked towards the back, took out his phone, and began calling the police. But before help could arrive, Stephanie followed him outside. She had gone to her car and returned with a kitchen knife. As Matthew tried to finish his emergency call, Stephanie approached, calm and deliberate. She knocked the phone from his hand, and then, without hesitation, she struck 3 times. The knife cut deep into his body. Matthew collapsed. But even as he lay bleeding, he used what strength he had left to pick up his phone. With trembling hands, he called 999 again. He told the operator what had happened, and moments later, he died. Stephanie was arrested at the scene. She didn't flee. She didn't resist. She showed no emotion. During her police interview, her words were chillingly cold. "I'm glad he's gone." She claimed that Matthew had assaulted someone she cared about, that he had done something to deserve it. But when pressed, she gave no names, no evidence, no timeline. Just the same sentence. "I'm glad he's gone." The trial was held at Maidstone Crown Court. Stephanie Langley pleaded not guilty to murder. Her defense team claimed the attack was an act of passion, that she had been triggered by something Matthew had done in the past. But the prosecution presented a very different narrative. They showed the jury Stephanie's calculated steps, the deliberate trip to her vehicle, retrieving the knife, the pre-attack statement to another pubgoer, the final strike, timed with Matthew's emergency call. There was no evidence to support her claim that Matthew had harmed anyone. There were no reports, no witnesses, no history, nothing to justify what had happened that night. And the most telling detail? Stephanie had waited until Matthew was distracted, on the phone before attacking. There was no confrontation, no argument, just cold execution. After a brief deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of murder. In May 2024, Stephanie Langley was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 24 years before parole eligibility. The judge called the act irrational but intentional. The family of Matthew Bryant sat in the courtroom, some in tears, others staring blankly ahead. Matthew's widow later described him as the glue of the family, a man who never saw it coming. As of April 2025, Stephanie Langley is incarcerated in a women's prison in the UK. She is 56 years old. She will be nearly 80 before she can apply for parole. To this day, she has offered no apology, no explanation, no remorse. The motive remains speculative. Whether it was resentment from long ago or something else entirely, the truth died with Matthew Bryant. But one moment remains etched in the minds of every witness that night. Get a drink while he's still alive. Case 15. Alice Wood, May 6, 2022. Hanley, Stoke-on-Trent. It was supposed to be a celebration. Alice Wood, a 24-year-old philosophy student from Cheadle, Staffordshire, and her fiancé, Ryan Watson, had been invited to a birthday party. Ryan worked as a support worker for Headway, a brain injury charity. That evening, the event was for one of the charity's service users, a relaxed, close-knit gathering. At first, everything seemed normal, but tension began to simmer beneath the surface. Multiple witnesses at the party noticed it. Alice accused Ryan of flirting with another woman. Her tone grew sharp, her behavior erratic. The couple had both been drinking heavily. Later testing would confirm that Alice was more than 1.5 times over the legal alcohol limit. When the party wound down, Alice insisted on driving. Despite Ryan's efforts to stop her, she took the wheel of their white Ford Fiesta. They headed home to a quiet residential area in Road Heath. They never made it through the night. At approximately 11:20 p.m., a loud argument erupted in the driveway of their home. Neighbors would later report hearing raised voices, accusations, shouting. But what followed turned a domestic dispute into a nightmare. Surveillance footage from a nearby property captured the horrifying sequence. First, Alice reversed the car at Ryan. He dodged. Then she accelerated, striking him with the bonnet. He rolled up the windshield, his head slamming against the glass. He slid off, but he was still alive, injured, disoriented. It wasn't over. Alice drove at him a third time. This time, not to scare. This time, to finish it. She hit him head-on and dragged his body beneath the vehicle for nearly 160 meters before finally stopping. Crushed, unconscious, and critically injured, Ryan Watson was already beyond saving. Moments later, Alice stumbled to a nearby neighbor's door. She was panicked, breathless, drunk. Her voice trembled as she told them, "Please, phone an ambulance. I think I ran over my boyfriend." Emergency services arrived quickly. Paramedics did what they could, but Ryan Watson was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was confirmed as crush asphyxiation. Police on site noted Alice's unsteady gait, slurred speech, and strong smell of alcohol. She was arrested on suspicion of murder. On the way to the station, she repeated the same words, "It's fine, I deserve it." Alice Wood was charged and remanded in custody. The case would move to trial at Chester Crown Court. During the proceedings, Alice pleaded not guilty to murder. She claimed it had been an accident, that she never meant to kill him. But the evidence told a different story. The CCTV showed deliberate movements, controlled steering, intentional acceleration, and 3 separate moments where she could have stopped, but didn't. The court heard how she left the party in a jealous rage, how she ignored Ryan's pleas not to drive, how she used her car again and again as a weapon. In February 2024, after a thorough trial, Alice Wood was found guilty of murder. The judge described her actions as deliberate and sustained. Before sentencing, he told her, "Prison may be hard for you, Alice Wood, but you only have yourself to blame for the situation you now find yourself in." She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years before parole eligibility. Alice had been days away from completing her final exams at Manchester University. She had even secured a scholarship to pursue a part-time research master's degree at Cambridge. Instead, she now spends her days behind bars. As of April 2025, Alice Wood has served just over 1 year of her sentence. She remains incarcerated at a women's prison in the UK. She will be 42 years old before she can be considered for release. Ryan Watson's family described him as compassionate, intelligent, and deeply loyal. He worked with vulnerable adults, devoted to helping others rebuild their lives. Now, because of one act of blind rage, he has no future. And for those who saw the footage, one image is hard to forget. Alice Wood, driving forward, again, and again, and again. Case 14. Christine R. August, 21st, 2022. A quiet rural property in Bratton, Devon. The air was still. The only sound was the rustle of horses in the nearby paddock. Then came the screaming. 72-year-old Ian R. was bleeding, staggering through the grass, gripping a knife lodged deep in his back. He had walked nearly 100 yards, pleading for help, calling for his wife to pull the blade out. She didn't. Her name was Christine R., 70 years old, his wife of several decades. And she was the one who had put the knife there. Christine and Ian shared an £800,000 small holding, a property they had maintained for years. They had livestock, stables, land. But beneath the peaceful surface, their relationship had decayed. Christine wanted to sell part of the land to fund a private investigator. Why? That was never clearly explained. But Ian opposed the sale. He wanted to keep the land. She didn't. That disagreement would become the tipping point in a marriage that had been deteriorating for years. According to prosecutors, this wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. Christine had made threats before. In past arguments, she had allegedly spiked Ian's tea with chili powder. On another occasion, she reportedly added a bitter substance to his drink. Police later found documents and journal entries suggesting she had considered harming him multiple times. And then, on that Sunday afternoon, she did. Ian was tending to one of their horses when the argument escalated again. Christine retrieved a 12.5-inch kitchen knife. She walked up behind her husband and stabbed him in the back with such force that it punctured through his internal organs. Despite his critical condition, Ian managed to walk nearly the length of a football field, begging her for help. But Christine never called emergency services. She didn't try to stop the bleeding. She stood by and watched. When paramedics finally arrived, alerted by a neighbor, it was too late. Ian R. was pronounced dead at the scene. Christine was arrested on site. She showed little emotion. In custody, she claimed self-defense, alleging years of verbal, psychological, and even physical abuse. She described Ian as controlling, paranoid, demeaning, but her version of events didn't match the evidence. At Exeter Crown Court, prosecutors revealed prior incidents in which she had harmed Ian, not the other way around. There were no reports of domestic abuse filed by her, no medical records, no witnesses. What they did find were patterns of manipulation, cruelty, and calculated aggression. Christine's behavior had become increasingly erratic over the years, and when she didn't get her way, she took matters into her own hands. The jury deliberated for just over 3 hours. Their verdict, guilty of murder. On March 22nd, 2024, Christine R. was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years before parole eligibility. As of April 2025, Christine R. has served just over 1 year of her sentence. She is now 71 years old, incarcerated at a women's prison in the south of England. If she survives her full minimum term, she will be 88 before she can apply for release. The most haunting part? Ian R. had no idea his final argument would end in his death. He turned his back, literally and figuratively, on someone he trusted for decades. And when the knife went in, the betrayal ran deeper than the wound itself. Case 13. Natalie Bennett, March 11, 2023. East Croxteth, Liverpool. It was just after 7 p.m. when neighbours on Carr Lane heard a heated argument from the home of Natalie Bennett, a 47-year-old woman with no criminal record. Inside with her was her 24-year-old boyfriend, Casey Anderson. By 8 p.m., Casey was stumbling into the street, clutching his chest, blood soaking through his clothes. He was crying, gasping, and begging for help. He rang a neighbor's doorbell and repeated the same words, "Please, I'm dying." He tried to dial 999, but before he could say who had stabbed him, Natalie snatched the phone. She told the operator, "He's come in like that." But that was a lie. Casey hadn't come in injured. He'd been attacked inside the house. Natalie was the only one there. Paramedics arrived to find him severely wounded. A deep stab wound had pierced vital organs. Multiple smaller wounds lined his torso and arms. Casey was rushed to Aintree Hospital, underwent emergency surgery, but passed away just 1 week before his 25th birthday. Natalie Bennett was arrested at the scene. Her demeanor was calm, detached. She denied everything. She told police she had no idea how Casey got hurt, that he must have arrived that way. But the crime scene told a different story. Investigators noticed the overpowering scent of bleach and detergent in the kitchen. Several knives were found soaking in the sink, recently cleaned. And then came the breakthrough. Ring doorbell footage from a nearby house. The camera showed Natalie standing near Casey with a knife raised to his head. It was the same time she claimed he was already bleeding. The prosecution had what they needed. In court, Natalie changed her story. She claimed self-defense, that Casey had been violent, that she feared for her life. But prosecutors revealed damning text messages, none of which indicated any history of abuse. No police calls, no medical records, no evidence of violence on his part. Instead, they found evidence of jealousy, volatility, and controlling behavior from Natalie herself. But the most chilling detail? Multiple witnesses heard her refer to Casey as a little rat, as he lay bleeding in the street, fighting to stay alive. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. On October 4th, 2023, they found Natalie Bennett guilty of murder. 1 month later, on November 10th, she was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years. The judge described it as a cold-blooded act that showed no regard for life. In the courtroom, Natalie remained stone-faced, but as she was led away, she flashed a thumbs up to her father, sitting in the public gallery. As of April 2025, Natalie Bennett has served just under 1.5 years of her sentence. She is 49 years old and currently held at HMP style. She will be eligible for parole in 2041 at the age of 66. But for Casey's loved ones, the sentence is permanent. They remember a kind, energetic young man, a son, a friend, now gone because of a lie, a knife, and a final insult whispered in the dark. Case 12, Bailey Haywood, March 13th, 2024, Bicester, Oxfordshire. Just past noon, emergency services received a call from a residential address on Mullen Road. The report was grim. A man had been seriously injured. By the time officers arrived, it was already too late. In the lounge of a modest house, 45-year-old Dale Bond lay on the floor with multiple stab wounds. The scene was chaotic. Blood pooled on the carpet. A kitchen knife lay discarded nearby. Despite efforts from Thames Valley Police and South Central ambulance crews, along with specialists from the air ambulance, Dale Bond was pronounced dead at the scene. The only clue to what had happened? A name. Bailey Haywood. 23 years old. No known criminal history and covered in blood. Police wasted no time. Shortly after discovering Dale's body, they followed a lead to a second address in Bicester, where Bailey had been staying. When officers knocked, Bailey opened the door calmly. Her clothes were stained with blood. She said nothing, didn't run, didn't explain. She was arrested on suspicion of murder and taken into custody. She offered no resistance and no motive. As the investigation unfolded, the lack of answers became more disturbing than any confession. There had been no known argument between Bailey and Dale, no romantic history, no financial disputes, no threats exchanged before the killing. Friends described Dale as quiet, respectful, and non-confrontational. He had met Bailey through mutual acquaintances. They were not close. They weren't enemies. They had only been in contact for a few months. The post-mortem revealed the cause of death: a deep, single stab wound to the torso, fatal on its own, but several other cuts indicated that the attack was not impulsive. It was targeted, deliberate. Bailey's silence didn't help her case. She refused to explain. She offered no statements. Even under direct questioning, she remained mostly mute, occasionally replying, but never clarifying why she had done what she did. It left prosecutors with only one strategy: present the evidence. At Oxford Crown Court, the jury heard how Bailey had shown no signs of distress after the killing. No panic, no remorse. A neighbor recalled seeing her walk down the street shortly after the attack, expressionless. Phone records showed no attempt to contact emergency services. CCTV captured her leaving the area with blood on her hands. There was no defense, no self-defense claim, no insanity plea, just silence. The jury was left with one chilling truth. She did it, but no one knows why. On October 27th, 2024, Bailey Haywood was found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 17 years and 181 days before she would be eligible for parole. As of April 2025, Bailey Haywood has served approximately 6 months of her sentence. She remains incarcerated in a women's facility in the southeast of England. She will be eligible for parole in December 2041 when she turns 41 years old. The case still haunts investigators. There are no warning signs, no diary entries, no online rants, just a moment of sudden violence and a woman who still refuses to say what caused it. Sometimes the scariest thing about evil is when it says nothing at all. Case 11. Anne-Marie Burrows, October 26th, 2023. Peterborough, England. At a modest flat on Friars Court in Woodston, something went very wrong. Inside, 56-year-old Paul Knowles, a Royal Navy veteran, lay unresponsive. His face was bruised, his eyes swollen shut. A sock was lodged deep in his throat. The cause of death: airway obstruction. And the person responsible? His friend, Anne-Marie Burrows, aged 52. Paul and Anne-Marie were drinking companions. They met often at his flat. There was no romantic involvement, just two people who shared long nights, too much alcohol, and quiet routines. But something happened that night. According to the post-mortem, Paul had been beaten around the face and neck before the sock was forced into his mouth. It was a deliberate act, not an accident, not a prank gone wrong. He had struggled, but not enough. Anne-Marie didn't call the police. She didn't report the death. Instead, she left the flat and took Paul's bank card with her. Within hours, she was seen on CCTV, walking into a nearby shop, calmly using the stolen card. Days passed. It wasn't until October 30th that she made contact. She phoned the police and said, "I think I've killed someone," but then hung up. She called again later, this time giving a name and an address. When officers arrived, they found Paul's body, badly decomposed, but still showing clear signs of a violent death. Anne-Marie was arrested shortly after. She claimed self-defense, saying Paul had threatened her with a bottle, but her version didn't hold. There was no evidence that Paul had attacked her, no defensive wounds on her body, no signs of a struggle consistent with her story. The court was told that after killing Paul, she had returned to her own accommodation and said nothing. No panic, no guilt. During her trial at Cambridge Crown Court, prosecutors emphasized the method of the killing, how Paul had not just been beaten, but suffocated intentionally. The sock wasn't casually placed. It was forced deep enough to cause total blockage. It was murder. The jury agreed. On July 19th, 2024, Anne-Marie Burrows was convicted of murder. She was sentenced on July 23rd to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years. As of April 2025, she has served approximately 9 months. She is incarcerated at HMP Peterborough. She will be eligible for parole in 2041 at the age of 69. Paul Knowles served his country, survived his time in the Royal Navy, but what ended his life wasn't combat or old age. It was a friend, a sock, and a betrayal that no one saw coming. Case 10. Karen Vamplew, December 15th, 2021, Newark, Nottinghamshire. It was just before dawn when flames lit up Eaton Court, a quiet complex for the elderly. Inside one of the bungalows, 77-year-old Elizabeth Ann Vamplew was asleep in her bed. She never woke up. Emergency responders found her barely recognizable, badly burned, her body ravaged by both fire and smoke. The heat had been intense, the damage catastrophic. She didn't stand a chance. The fire hadn't started accidentally. There were no candles, no dropped cigarettes. Investigators concluded almost immediately it had been set on purpose. And the person responsible? Her daughter-in-law, Karen Vamplew, age 44. Karen had been Elizabeth's primary caregiver. She knew her schedule, knew her needs, knew her vulnerabilities. Elizabeth suffered from limited mobility and hearing loss. She was entirely dependent on others. She couldn't escape, and on that night, she wasn't meant to. CCTV footage showed Karen visiting the house twice, once to start the fire, then again later to pretend to discover it. When questioned, she claimed she'd come to check on her mother-in-law and was horrified by the fire, but investigators weren't convinced. They traced Karen's steps that night. Her car was caught on street-facing cameras. She wasn't parked directly in front of Elizabeth's bungalow. She had parked at a distance, wearing dark clothing and a hoodie. When she reappeared at the scene an hour later, she feigned surprise and panic. She called emergency services. But the fire had already consumed the bedroom and Elizabeth. What motivated the crime became clear quickly: money. Karen had been draining Elizabeth's bank account for months, from over £27,000 to just £105. When the bank detected suspicious activity and blocked transactions, Karen's access was cut off. On the same day as the fire, Karen had taken Elizabeth to the bank in an attempt to lift the restrictions. When that failed, she set her plan in motion. The first arrest came 2 days later, on December 17th. Karen was released initially due to insufficient evidence, but over the following months, the case continued to build. Phone records, CCTV footage, forensic analysis of accelerants used at the scene. And then came the key detail. The fire had been deliberately set on Elizabeth's bed while she slept. In May 2023, Karen was rearrested and formally charged with murder and arson with intent to endanger life. The trial took place at Leicester Crown Court. The prosecution laid it out clearly. Karen saw her mother-in-law not as a person, but as a financial burden, and then a solution. They called it an act of cold calculation. The jury took little time. On May 20th, 2024, Karen Van Plu was found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 32 years before parole. As of April 2025, Karen Van Plu has served 11 months of that sentence. She will be 76 years old before she's eligible for release. Elizabeth's death was not fast. Smoke inhalation, severe burns, no way out. She died alone because someone she trusted planned it that way. Case 9. Virginia McCullough, June 2019. Chelmsford, Essex. Inside a 2-story family home, something horrifying unfolded. It would take over 4 years before anyone found out. Virginia McCullough, 31, was living with her elderly parents, John, 70, and Lois, 71. She was their caregiver, their daughter, and ultimately, their killer. It started quietly. Virginia prepared drinks laced with prescription medications. John took his. He passed away in his sleep. But Lois, by chance or suspicion, didn't drink hers. The next morning, she woke up to find her husband unresponsive. She had no idea he was already gone, and Virginia knew if Lois realized what had happened, everything would unravel. So she acted quickly and brutally. She struck her mother repeatedly with a hammer, then used a knife to finish the job. The killing was methodical, intentional, and designed to silence. Then came the cover-up. Virginia stored her father's remains in a makeshift tomb built from masonry blocks and wood panels in the house. Her mother's body, hidden in an upstairs wardrobe, and for over 4.5 years, Virginia kept the secret. She continued collecting their pensions, used their credit cards, impersonated them in phone calls and online forms. She even ordered a new credit card while pretending to be her mother. The motive was clear: money. Virginia had racked up debts of over £60,000. She was addicted to online gambling. She needed cash, and she didn't care who she had to bury to get it. By 2023, she had spent over £150,000 living off the identity and savings of her dead parents. And all the while, their bodies were just rooms away. The facade unraveled when concerned relatives requested a welfare check. It had been years since anyone had seen John or Lois in person. Essex police entered the home in September 2023. They immediately noticed the smell. Then, one by one, they found the bodies. When arrested, Virginia said one thing: "I knew this day would come. Cheer up, at least you've caught the bad guy." At trial, she pleaded guilty to both murders. The court described her actions as inhuman, her lies deliberate and extended. On July 25, 2024, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 36 years. As of April 2025, Virginia McCullough has served just 9 months. She remains incarcerated in a high-security women's facility. She will be 67 years old before she can even apply for parole. The silence of that Chelmsford home lasted for nearly 5 years. Family birthdays passed. Holidays came and went. And all the while, Virginia lived above the people she murdered, spending their money, forging their voices, and fooling the world, until the smell of death finally caught up with her. Case 8. Lauren Harris, November 20th, 2023, Colwyn Bay, North Wales. Police responded to a call from a concerned neighbour. A 65-year-old man, David Mark Wilcox, hadn't been seen since the night before. Inside his home on Bayview Road, they found him, lying motionless in the living room, covered in blood. His body bore multiple stab wounds, blunt force trauma, and signs of a violent struggle. He had been attacked, robbed, and left for dead by someone he had tried to help. Her name was Lauren Harris, 29 years old, no fixed address, and no remorse. Lauren had moved into David's home earlier in 2023. He was kind, generous. He offered her a place to stay, wanting to help her turn her life around. Instead, he became her victim. In the days leading up to the murder, Lauren met a man named David Webster, a 43-year-old with a criminal past. She also connected with another associate, Thomas Whitley. On the night of November 19th, she invited both men to David's house. There was drinking, drug use, then an argument. It escalated quickly. David Wilcox was beaten with a vodka bottle and stabbed multiple times. The fatal wounds left him unconscious and bleeding out on the floor of his own home. After the killing, Harris and Webster took David's watch and bank cards. They fled in his Volvo, and within hours, Lauren attempted to withdraw cash from 2 ATMs. CCTV later captured her using the stolen card. Soon after, they crashed the car, abandoned it, and disappeared. By the time paramedics reached David, it was too late. He died later that day. The investigation moved quickly. Police traced the stolen card activity, reviewed CCTV, and gathered forensic evidence from the vehicle and house. Lauren was arrested days later. Webster and Whitley were taken into custody soon after. In custody, Lauren denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her trial began at Mold Crown Court in August 2024. It wasn't just the brutality of the attack that stunned the public. It was her behavior. As she was led into the courtroom, Lauren Harris began singing the song, "Man, I Feel Like a Woman," smiling, unbothered, defiant. Inside, she showed no remorse. She laughed, interrupted the proceedings, treated the entire process like a game. The jury heard how she had used David Wilcox, then discarded him, how she had turned on the man who trusted her. She was found guilty of murder, alongside David Webster. On August 12, 2024, both were sentenced to life in prison. Lauren received a minimum term of 25 years. Webster, 23 years. Whitley was found guilty of robbery and received a lesser sentence. As of April 2025, Lauren Harris has served 8 months of her sentence. She is held in a high-security facility in Wales. She will be 54 years old before she can even apply for parole. David Wilcox opened his door and his heart to someone he believed needed help. In return, he was betrayed, brutalized, and killed. And the woman who ended his life sang as she entered court. Case 7. Rebecca Moore, March 9, 2024. 4 a.m. Sheffield, South Yorkshire. 25-year-old Rebecca Moore made a phone call. The person she called was Saqib Ali, 24, a man relaxing at a friend's flat, playing video games. She offered him a deal: hard substances, cash, and more. She asked him to meet her at Ponderosa Park, alone. What Saqib didn't know was that he was walking into a trap. At the park, 2 teenagers were waiting: Barney Griffin, 17th, Jack Douglas, 16th. Both were armed with machetes. As Saqib arrived, they ambushed him. The attack was fast and savage. Saqib begged them to stop. He pleaded for his life, but they didn't. By the time it ended, Saqib was lying in a pool of blood, his body torn apart by dozens of deep, bladed wounds. The teens fled. Rebecca disappeared. Saqib died on the scene. Police launched a major investigation. Witnesses described the attackers. CCTV helped identify their escape route. Griffin and Douglas were arrested 3 days later. Rebecca Moore, the one who had lured Saqib to the park, was taken into custody soon after. When questioned, she lied about her identity, giving officers a false name and birth date. But the truth didn't take long to catch up. Griffin and Douglas pleaded guilty to murder. But Rebecca, she denied everything. That forced Saqib's family to sit through 16 painful days of court hearings, to hear the details, to watch the footage, to see the photos, all because Rebecca refused to admit her role. At Sheffield Crown Court, prosecutors described her as the architect of the attack. She didn't hold the machete, but she brought the victim there. She made it possible. Without her call, Saqib would still be alive. On November 11th, 2024, the jury found Rebecca Moore guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 15 years. Griffin was sentenced to 16 years. Douglas received 15 years. As of April 2025, Rebecca Moore has served 5 months of her sentence. She is currently incarcerated in a women's prison in Yorkshire. She will be 40 years old before she is eligible for parole. Saqib Ali died in a public park, surrounded by strangers, after being lured by someone he trusted. He didn't stand a chance, and for months afterward, Rebecca Moore pretended her hands were clean, while the blood remained on someone else's blade. Case 6. Gemma Mitchell, June 11th, 2021. Wembley, northwest London. CCTV captures a woman entering the home of 67-year-old Mi Kuen Chong. She's carrying a large blue suitcase. 4 hours later, she walks out with the same suitcase. But now, it's visibly heavier. The woman's name is Gemma Mitchell, a 38-year-old former osteopath, quiet, educated, and soon to become one of the most calculating killers in modern British history. Gemma had met Mi through their local church. Mi, originally from Malaysia, had lived in London for 30 years. She suffered from mental health issues, but was described as sweet and childlike in demeanor. She trusted people, especially those who claimed to be spiritual. Gemma claimed to be one of them. In 2020, Mi agreed to give Gemma £200,000 to help renovate her dilapidated family home. But as time passed, Mi changed her mind and withdrew the offer. That decision cost her her life. On that June day, Gemma arrived at Mi's home. At some point during the visit, she killed her, though the exact cause of death was never confirmed. She then dismembered the body, placing parts of it into the suitcase she had brought with her. Before leaving, she stole documents, including Mi's will. Gemma returned to her home with the suitcase. She stored it in her back garden shed for 2 weeks. During that time, she forged a new will, making herself the primary beneficiary of Mi's estate, totaling nearly £700,000. On June 26th, Gemma hired a car. She drove over 200 miles to Salcombe, Devon, a quiet coastal area. There, she dumped Mi's decapitated body in the woods. The next day, holidaymakers discovered it. 4 days later, police found the head, buried nearby. Back in London, Mi's lodger had reported her missing. Gemma told police Mi had gone to stay with family by the sea. But CCTV didn't lie. They had footage of Gemma going into the house, footage of her leaving with the suitcase, phone data showing her trip to Devon, and forensics tying her to the scene. The investigation led to her arrest. Inside her home, police found the forged will. They also discovered handwritten drafts and documents referencing how to stage a legal inheritance. The case went to trial at the Old Bailey. Prosecutors called Gemma's actions calculating and chilling. They highlighted her background in human anatomy, skills she had learned while studying osteopathy at King's College London. She had even won an award for her precision. In court, she showed no emotion, no apology, no remorse. On October 28, 2022, Gemma Mitchell was found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 34 years. The judge described her as a woman with devious intentions and a cold disregard for human life. As of April 2025, Gemma Mitchell has served 2 years and 6 months of her sentence. She will be 72 years old before she is eligible for parole. Mi Kuen Chong died because she trusted the wrong person. Someone who used religion to get close. Someone who used her knowledge of anatomy, not to heal, but to conceal. and someone who believed a forged will could erase a human life. Case 5. Christina Robinson, June 5, 2023. Ushaw Moor, near Durham. Emergency services were called to a flat on Bracken Court. Inside, they found a 3-year-old boy, unconscious and barely clinging to life. His name was Dwelania Robinson. Despite immediate efforts by paramedics, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The woman who called for help was his mother, 30-year-old Christina Robinson. But what unfolded in the following investigation shocked even experienced detectives. Over the course of several weeks, Dwelania had suffered multiple injuries. He had been beaten, scalded, and left to suffer in silence. At the time of his death, over 60 wounds were found on his body, both old and new. The most severe? Burns covering more than 20% of his body, concentrated on his lower half. They had been inflicted when Christina forced him to bathe in boiling water, a punishment, she claimed, for soiling himself. She treated his injuries with bandages and ointments bought online, never seeking medical help. Christina told investigators she followed the teachings of a fringe religious group, Black Hebrew Israelites, which, in her interpretation, promoted discipline through the rod. She admitted to using a cane on her son regularly. She called it spiritual correction. But what she did to him went far beyond any doctrine. It was abuse. Repeated, prolonged, fatal. On the day of his death, Dwelania was found with new injuries. He had been struck again, severely. Neighbors described the boy as rarely seen. When he appeared malnourished and timid. Christina, on the other hand, seemed withdrawn, focused on her faith and paranoid about outside influence. The court heard that she often isolated herself and had been reported once before for neglect, but no action had been taken. During the investigation, Christina expressed regret, but only in religious terms. She told officers, "I did it because I love my children. I wanted to protect them. I was ashamed." She later added, "If there's any way I could be put to death, I would like that. I mean it, 100%. She was charged with murder and 4 counts of child cruelty, including failure to seek medical attention, excessive punishment, and leaving the child unattended. The trial took place at Newcastle Crown Court in May 2024. In a dramatic moment, Christina fired her legal team and chose to represent herself for the remainder of the proceedings. She showed no emotional connection to the charges, no breakdown, no reflection. The jury found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 25 years. As of April 2025, Christina Robinson has served 11 months. She remains in a secure women's facility. She will be 55 years old before she is eligible for parole. Dwelania never had a voice in court. He was never given a chance to heal. He suffered in silence, under the roof of the person who was meant to protect him. And in the name of religion, Christina Robinson extinguished a life barely begun. Case 4. Ashana Stud Home. September 25, 2022. Ealing, West London. Neighbours at a quiet block of flats noticed something strange. A foul smell wafting from one of the ground floor apartments. The odour had worsened over days. And then they saw something even more disturbing. Maggots crawling out from under the door. Police were called. They forced entry. Inside, they found a body so decomposed it had to be identified by dental records. The woman's name was Shakira Spencer. She was 35 years old, and she had been starved, beaten and humiliated until her body gave out. The people responsible, her so-called friends. At the center of the case was Ashana Stud Home. She was 43, a mother, a neighbor, and according to prosecutors, the ringleader of a torture campaign that spanned more than a year. She didn't act alone. Her boyfriend, Shah Pendlebury, and their associate, Lisa Richardson, were also charged. Together, They orchestrated one of the most prolonged and sadistic acts of abuse ever documented in a UK murder case. It began with manipulation. Shakira was described as socially awkward, sweet-natured, but isolated. After befriending Ashana, she was cut off from her family. Her phone was monitored, her money controlled, her identity stolen. Over time, the abuse escalated. Shakira went from being a guest in Ashana's home to a slave-like existence. She was forced to perform chores on demand, deprived of food, made to eat only ketchup sachets. Her weight dropped from a size 16 to a size 6. Physical torture soon followed, scalding her feet, beating her with objects, keeping her confined in cramped, unsanitary spaces. And it didn't stop there. Videos recovered from mobile phones showed the group mocking and humiliating her. Messages revealed how they took pleasure in her suffering, referring to her as it, not her. On September 12th, after a final brutal assault, the trio placed Shakira in the trunk of a car, drove her to her own flat, and stuffed her inside a cupboard. They left her there to die. 2 weeks later, when the body was discovered, decomposition had made it impossible to determine the exact cause of death. But the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, footage, witnesses. One of Pendlebury's relatives contacted police after he confessed to being involved in the killing. All three were arrested and charged with murder and preventing a lawful burial. At trial, the courtroom sat in silence as jurors were shown video clips of the abuse. Shakira's mother broke down. The footage was so disturbing that some court officials looked away. The jury took little time. On December 8th, 2023, Ashana Studholme, Shah Pendlebury, and Lisa Richardson were all found guilty. In February 2024, they were each sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 34 years. As of April 2025, Ashana Studholme has served 1 year and 2 months of her sentence. She will be 77 before parole is even a possibility. Shakira Spencer died locked inside a cupboard, alone, starved, and forgotten. And her killers? They laughed while filming her pain. This wasn't a moment of madness. It was sustained evil, led by a woman who saw vulnerability and destroyed it. Case 3. Veronique John June 11th, 2023. Flack Street, Stoke-on-Trent. A call came through to emergency services. A woman's voice, frantic, disconnected. She said simply, "I've murdered my children." The caller was Veronique John, 50 years old, a mother of 2, and the woman behind one of the most heart-wrenching family killings in recent memory. The day before, she had assaulted her husband, Nathan John, with a wooden object. She believed he was having an affair. She was arrested and released with a community resolution notice. Less than 24 hours later, she turned her anger towards someone else, her own children, Ethan, aged 11, and Elizabeth, just 7. Police arrived at the family home to a scene of unimaginable horror. Both children were found inside, stabbed multiple times. Ethan had more than 20 wounds. Elizabeth was also critically injured. Neither survived. After the attack, Veronique drove to a car wash on Campbell Road, where her husband worked. She confronted him and stabbed him too. Nathan survived. When police arrived at the family home, Veronique did not resist. She told officers, "If you have a gun, shoot me. I am not a monster." She added, "He was going to take them from me." Investigators later found a chilling internet search on her device. Can a foreigner be charged with murder in the UK? Veronique's marriage was described as toxic. Frequent arguments, mutual accusations. But nothing could have predicted the outcome. She later confessed, "I did it because I love my children, to protect them. If I could be put to death, I would accept that." She was charged with 2 counts of murder and attempted murder. However, psychiatric evaluations diagnosed her with complex PTSD and ruled her unfit to stand trial in the traditional sense. Instead, a trial of facts was held at Nottingham Crown Court in July 2024. The jury concluded that she did commit the acts as charged. She was handed an indefinite hospital order under the Mental Health Act to be detained at Rampton High Security Hospital. As of April 2025, Veronique John has served 9 months. She remains in psychiatric detention. Her release depends entirely on mental health evaluations and the ongoing risk she may pose. 2 innocent children lost their lives, not to strangers, but to someone who claimed to love them, someone who believed death was a form of protection. There is no parole date, no timeline, only the echo of a final decision, made in silence, behind a locked family door. Case 2. Sharon Carr, June 7, 1992. Camberley, Surrey, 18-year-old Katie Ratcliffe had just finished a night out. She was walking home from a nightclub when a 12-year-old girl emerged from the shadows. That girl's name was Sharon Carr. Armed with a knife, she followed Katie down the street. Then, without warning, attacked. Katie was stabbed more than 30 times, many of the wounds centered around her chest and neck. The attack was so brutal that investigators initially assumed it had been carried out by an adult male. But Sharon slipped away unnoticed. Katie's body was found the next morning near a cemetery, and for 2 years, no one knew who had done it. Then, in 1994, Sharon struck again. She attacked a fellow student in the toilet block of her secondary school, without provocation. She stabbed the girl repeatedly, only stopping when others intervened. This time, she was arrested. During her time in custody, the truth came out. Sharon began writing in a diary. She confessed to the murder of Katie Ratcliffe, describing details only the killer would know. One line read, "If only I could do it again. I was born to be a murderer." She even made a chilling tribute on the 4th anniversary of the killing. Respect to Katie Ratcliffe. 4 years ago today. During questioning, Sharon admitted to the murder with no emotion, no remorse. She described the killing with fascination, almost pride. Police reviewed her journals, drawings, and letters. They found repeated references to violent fantasies, mutilation, and the desire to kill again. At trial in 1997, she was 17 years old. The judge described the case as unique and disturbing. Sharon Carr became the youngest female convicted of murder in the UK. She was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 14 years. But Sharon never changed. Over the years, she remained violent and unpredictable in custody. She assaulted fellow inmates, threatened staff, and reportedly made plans to kill again. Psychiatric assessments have repeatedly deemed her too dangerous for release. As of April 2025, Sharon Carr has served 28 years, twice her minimum term. She remains incarcerated in a secure psychiatric facility. She is now 45 years old. There is no scheduled parole hearing. Sharon Carr didn't kill out of revenge, or passion, or even gain. She picked a victim at random, took her life in silence, then went on with hers until she couldn't keep the secret anymore. What made a 12-year-old become a killer? No one has ever found the answer. Not even her. Case 1. Lucy Letby. Between June 2015 and June 2016, something was terribly wrong at the Countess of Chester Hospital. The neonatal unit, normally a place of hope, saw a disturbing rise in infant deaths and near-fatal collapses. Doctors raised concerns. Parents had questions. But it would take years before the world knew who or what was responsible. At the center of the suspicion was one person, Lucy Letby, a neonatal nurse, respected, trusted, and later accused of being one of the most prolific child killers in modern British history. By 2018, police launched Operation Hummingbird, a sweeping investigation into medical records, autopsy findings, and staffing rosters. What they found was a chilling pattern. In each case, Lucy Letby had been present, and many of the incidents followed unusual and often unexplained medical episodes: air embolisms, insulin overdoses, excessive feeding, and in rare cases, blunt force trauma. In 2020, she was charged with 7 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder involving 10 infants. Her trial began in October 2022 at Manchester Crown Court, lasting nearly 10 months, with over 150 witnesses called. Parents took the stand, some in tears, describing healthy babies who suddenly collapsed without warning. Medical experts pointed to Letby's presence at nearly every incident. Prosecutors alleged a pattern too consistent to ignore. Letby sat in the dock, expressionless, denying all charges. In August 2023, she was found guilty of 7 murders and 7 attempted murders, although the jury failed to reach verdicts on 6 additional charges. She received a whole life order, a rare sentence in the UK, ensuring she will never be released. No parole, no fixed term, no second chance. She became only the 4th woman in UK history to receive that punishment. As of April 2025, Lucy Letby remains incarcerated at HMP Bronzefield, having served 1 year and 8 months of her sentence. But the story is far from over. In the months following her conviction, growing controversy has begun to cast a shadow over the case. Several legal experts, journalists, and public figures have raised concerns about the evidence used to convict her. Critics argue that the case relied heavily on circumstantial and statistical evidence, with no direct proof, no CCTV, no eyewitness, no forensic trace. Others question the hospital's internal practices, alleging systemic failures, potential record tampering, and confirmation bias among investigators. A group of prominent doctors and legal professionals have joined a campaign demanding a formal review of the trial and its conclusions. In response, Lucy Letby has launched an appeal against her conviction, which is currently under judicial consideration. Meanwhile, a statutory public inquiry ordered by the UK government is ongoing, now examining not only Letby's actions, but also the hospital trust's management, medical protocols, and the response to early warnings from concerned staff. The case that once appeared clear-cut has become a source of national debate. Was Lucy Letby a calculating killer hiding in plain sight, or a convenient scapegoat for a broken system? Until the appeals process and inquiry conclude, the truth remains clouded. But for now, she sits behind bars, convicted but not forgotten. And the world continues to ask, did she really do it? Or could the most infamous nurse in Britain's history be innocent? Some of these women were mothers, others were caregivers, friends, daughters, nurses, but behind closed doors, their actions spoke louder than any mask they wore. They didn't just kill, they betrayed trust, exploited love, and crossed lines few can imagine. We've counted down the most evil female killers in prison today, from obsession to torture, to cold calculation, and beyond. What makes someone cross that line? Is it trauma, desperation, or something far darker? Now, we want to hear from you. Which case shocked you the most? Leave a comment below, and if you want more real stories, raw and unfiltered, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it smiles. See you on the next one.